A&B marker.
Growing up for me, I was more so sheltered growing up. I came from a very religious background. My grandfather was the pastor of our church, and my family kept me more so in church and school. So I didn't have too much influence within the community itself, but I was definitely aware of the area that I grew up in. I remember the Rodney King riot. I remember a lot of things about living in South Central. I would say, though, that my mother kept me pretty grounded and really focused on my dreams and ambitions. I think any PK preacher's kid can agree that when you grow up in that type of a family, it is very strict and it adds a lot of pressure on you. At least for me, it did. Always trying to strive to be this quote unquote perfection or perfect, which really doesn't exist. That's something that's always stuck with me, and it's also carried over into my adult life, always wanting to challenge myself to be better. And it was a lot of pressure growing up, never wanting to be displeasing to God and what I was taught growing up. It was very complex for me. My life was by no means easy growing up. It was very strict, but my mother's love for me at a very early age, as far back as my brain can remember, my mother has always had an openness with myself and my brothers. So I always felt that I could dream or talk to her about anything. So though my life was not easy, from coming from more of my religious side of my family, my mom was the pillar of hope and the beacon of light that I had, if you will. Well, when I was really little, I just knew that I was in the wrong body. Of course, I could not articulate the proper terminology. I don't even remember hearing the word transgender at that age. So I equated it to what I knew at the time, which was being gay, which obviously is inaccurate. It was never a moment where I changed into something else or someone else. I've always been the same person. I've always carried the same morals, and I've always conducted myself the same way. So I've always known who I was. It was the rest of the world that had to catch up to me. I would say this, it's very simple to me. And I would say this to anyone, whether you are experiencing being a person of trans experience or not. You have one life to live. If you feel something in your heart, as long as you're not harming anyone, I would say live your best life while you have the chance to. And I would say to follow your heart. That's what life is about, isn't it? I remember, this story makes me a little emotional, actually. I remember being a very depressed child and feeling trapped in my own chambers of my mind. And I told myself, if by any means magic is real, I told myself that I would go somewhere far away where no one knew who I was, and I would be married with I would be married with a white picket fence, and I would give birth to beautiful children and teach them about God's love, and I would pick flowers and plant a garden and have a beautiful life. And that was my dream when I was a child. I didn't want to be displeasing to what I was taught growing up. You see, my understanding of God at that age was what I was told. It wasn't until I was about 13 that I found God for myself, until I realized that God was so much more, and that God loved me for who I am. And see, God is the universe, and God lives within us. And at the time, I didn't want to go to hell. That's what I was taught would happen to me. So yes, of course, I was silent about everything. I was a very quiet child. I was very passive. And I was afraid to bring dishonoring to my family, bring shame to my family, because once again, we are the first family of the church. And I didn't want to bring shame upon my grandfather or any of my family. And I didn't want them to not love me. So I was quiet, and I didn't talk about how I really felt until I got a little older and more brave.